They told her she was too small. 5'4", with a frame built for distance running, not combat. The Army recruiter in Houston had looked at her across his government desk 8 years ago and suggested administrative roles. Something more suitable, he had said, for someone of her stature. Yara Okonkwo had smiled politely, thanked him for his time, and enlisted for infantry support the following week at a different office. Now she stood at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, surrounded by 43 other candidates for the Cultural Support Team Assessment and Selection course. 31 of them were taller than her. All of them were watching. The July humidity pressed against her skin like a wet blanket as the cadre assembled before them. Pine trees ringed the training area, their shadows offering no relief from the Carolina heat. Yara kept her eyes forward and her breathing steady. She had learned years ago that the body follows the mind, and her mind had already decided how this would end. Master Sergeant Colt Hendricks walked the line of candidates with the deliberate pace of a man who had broken hundreds of soldiers and intended to break hundreds more. He stood 6'2", with ice-blue eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. When he reached Yara, he stopped. The pause lasted 3 seconds longer than it had for anyone else. He moved on without a word. That silence said everything. Before we continue with Yara's journey, drop a comment and let us know what state or country you're watching from. Maybe you have experienced that moment when someone looked at you and decided what you could not do before you ever had a chance to show them what you could. The first evolution was a 3-meal formation run. Not fast by special operations standards, but designed to identify the weak links before the real suffering began. Yara settled into the middle of the pack and found a rhythm. Her lungs knew this effort. Her legs knew this ground. She had been running since she was 12 years old, chasing her older brother through Houston's Memorial Park until the day she finally caught him. A candidate 2 rows ahead began to falter at mile 2. His stride shortened, his arms dropping lower with each step. Yara recognized the signs. She had seen them in 100 training runs over the years. What happened next would determine whether he finished this evolution or became a cautionary tale for the others. She did not think about what she did. When the formation passed him, she caught his elbow just long enough to steady his rhythm. No words, just contact, a reminder that his body could do what his mind was forgetting. He caught himself, found his pace, and finished with the group. No one acknowledged it. That was the point. Hendricks stood at the finish line with a clipboard and a stopwatch. His eyes tracked Yara as she crossed, her breathing controlled despite the effort. She had finished in the top third, ahead of 17 candidates who outweighed her by 40 pounds or more. The afternoon brought combat water survival qualification. Most candidates feared this event, the disorientation of dark water and restricted movement creating panic in soldiers who were otherwise brave. Yara stripped down to her issued swimsuit and waited for her lane assignment. The test was simple in design and brutal in execution. Enter the water in full gear, ditch the equipment, swim 50 meters, and recover a weighted object from the bottom. Fail any portion and face immediate elimination. When her turn came, Yara dove cleanly into the murky pool. The weight of her gear pulled her down, but she had expected that. She had trained for this in public pools across Texas, teaching her body to find calm in chaos. Her fingers worked the buckles without hurry. One by one the pieces fell away. She kicked for the surface, took a measured breath, and began her swim. Sergeant First Class Marcus Reeve watched from the pool deck. He was 30 years old, a former Ranger who had washed out of Special Forces selection due to a blown knee. This was his second attempt at a Special Operations support role, and he had arrived with preconceptions about who belonged and who did not. The small woman cutting through the water with mechanical efficiency was not matching his expectations. Yara retrieved the weight from the bottom and surfaced with it held over her head. The evaluator marked her time. She climbed from the pool and took her place among those who had passed. That evening, after chow, Hendricks gathered the remaining candidates for a briefing. 2 had already been eliminated. 42 remained. He spoke about what the cultural support team did, how they attached to special operations units in combat zones, how they engaged with local women and children, gathering intelligence that male operators could never access. How they operated in the most dangerous environments on Earth alongside the most elite soldiers the military produced. Then he spoke about what most candidates did not understand. This is not about equality, he said. This is about capability. I do not care what you look like or where you came from. I care whether you can do the job when lives depend on it. Most of you cannot. That is not an insult. It is a statistical fact. By the end of this course, 70% of you will be gone. His eyes found Yara in the formation. Some of you should save yourselves the trouble and leave now. You know who you are. The briefing ended. Candidates dispersed to their barracks for what would be their last full night of sleep for weeks. Yara was checking her equipment for the morning when a shadow fell across her bunk. Hendricks stood over her. Up close, the lines in his face told stories of deployments she could only imagine. His voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. I have seen 100 candidates who look like you. Not one of them made it past A5. You will not be different. The only question is how much pain you want to endure before you accept that truth. Yara looked up at him. Her hands continued their work on her gear, steady and unhurried. She said nothing. Her answer would come in the days ahead. Hendricks held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked away. His boots echoed on the barracks floor until the door closed behind him. Yara finished her equipment check and lay back on her bunk. Above her, the ceiling tiles held no answers. But she was not looking for answers. She already had the only one that mattered. The recruiter had been wrong. So was Hendricks. She would prove it the same way she proved everything. One evolution at a time. The whistle came at 0430. Yara was already awake, had been for 20 minutes, her body running on the internal clock she had developed over years of pre-dawn training. Around her, candidates scrambled from bunks with a confused urgency of people torn from dreams they would not remember. Outside, the Carolina darkness was thick with moisture. Hendricks stood beneath a single floodlight with two other cadre members flanking him like shadows given form. His voice cut through the humid air without effort. Today you learn what tired means. Formation. Now, physical training began before the sun rose and continued long after it climbed above the pine trees. Push-ups until arms trembled. Flutter kicks until abdomens burned. Buddy carries across sand that shifted and stole momentum with every step. Yara partnered with a candidate named Birch, a former college volleyball player who stood 5'11" and moved with natural athleticism. Birch carried Yara easily during her turn. When they switched, Yara lifted the taller woman onto her shoulders and did not let her pace falter. Reeve watched from 3 pairs down. His partner was struggling, a thick-necked candidate from Georgia who had played football and assumed that muscle mass would translate to military performance. It did not. Reeve practically dragged him through the final 100 meters. When the evolution ended, Reeve found himself standing near Yara at the water station. She drank without urgency, her breathing already returning to normal while others gasped and bent at the waist. You carried her the whole way, Reeve said. Did not slow down once. Yara refilled her canteen. She is my partner. That is the job. Something shifted in his expression. Not respect, not yet, but the beginning of curiosity. He nodded once and moved away. The afternoon brought team navigation exercises through the forest surrounding Fort Bragg. Hendricks divided the candidates into groups of 4, and Yara noted without surprise that she had been assigned to a team with Prescott, a young sergeant who had made his opinion of female candidates clear through sidelong glances and muttered comments. The other 2 members were Reeve and a quiet specialist named Dominguez who seemed content to follow rather than lead. Their objective was simple: reach a series of checkpoints using only a map, compass, and the terrain. No GPS, no trails, just pine forest, swamp, and the relentless summer heat. Prescott assumed command without discussion. He set a pace that was aggressive but manageable, and Yara fell into position without complaint. There would be time to demonstrate competence. Demanding recognition before earning, it was a fool's game. They hit the first checkpoint without incident. The second required crossing a drainage creek swollen from recent rains. Prescott chose a route that looked passable but proved treacherous, the mud beneath the water sucking at boots and threatening to pull candidates under. Dominguez slipped and went down hard, soaking his pack and himself. Yara reached him first. She braced her feet against the submerged root and hauled him upright before the current could carry him downstream. Her grip was stronger than her frame suggested, years of climbing and gymnastics having built functional muscle that did not announce itself. "Thanks," Dominguez managed through chattering teeth despite the heat. "Save it for dry land," Yara replied. They made the far bank and continued. Prescott said nothing about the assist, but his pace slowed slightly, became more considered. Perhaps he was learning. Perhaps he was simply tired. Either way, the team moved better for it. The third checkpoint brought them to a clearing where Hendricks waited with his clipboard. He marked their time without comment, but his eyes lingered on Yara as the team caught their breath. She met his gaze and held it until he looked away first. That night in the barracks, the candidates who remained compared their damage. Blisters that would become calluses. Bruises that would yellow and fade. The small injuries that accumulated into a constant background of discomfort. Birch sat on the bunk across from Yara, stretching her long legs and wincing at the tightness in her hamstrings. "How do you do it?" Birch asked. "You are half my size, and you do not even look tired." Yara considered the question. She could have given a dismissive answer, could have deflected with humor or false modesty. Instead, she offered something true. "I learned a long time ago that my body will do whatever my mind tells it. The trick is not letting your mind negotiate with your body. You decide what you're going to do, and then you do it. Pain is just information. It is not a vote." Birch absorbed this in silence. After a moment, she nodded, though Yara could see the doubt still living behind her eyes. Some lessons could only be learned through experience. No amount of explanation could substitute for the moment when you discovered what you were actually made of. The following morning brought the announcement Yara had been expecting. Hendricks gathered the candidates after breakfast, his expression revealing nothing. "Today you face your first major evolution. A 12-mile ruck march with full combat load. 45 pounds minimum. You will complete the distance in under 3 hours, or you will not continue in this program. Immediately following the march, you will conduct stress shooting qualification. Shaking hands do not hit targets. Uncontrolled breathing does not save lives." He paused, letting the information settle. "For those of you who have been coasting, today is when you discover what that costs. For those of you who have been giving everything, today is when you discover whether everything is enough." His eyes swept the formation and stopped on Yara. She stood at parade rest, her face composed, her breathing even. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a Houston recruiter was telling her to try something easier. She had tried something harder instead. Tomorrow she would find out if harder was enough. The candidates dispersed to prepare their rucks. 45 pounds of equipment, water, and ammunition. Yara hefted her pack and settled the weight across her hips the way she had practiced hundreds of times. Her stride would be shorter than the taller candidates, which meant more steps to cover the same ground. More steps meant more effort. More effort meant more pain. She did not care. Pain was just information. Reeve appeared beside her, adjusting his own pack straps. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I have been ready for this my whole life," Yara replied. He studied her for a moment, then surprised her with something that almost resembled a smile. "Yeah," he said, "I'm starting to believe that." They moved toward the start point as the sun began its climb. In 3 hours, some of them would still be standing. Others would be gone. Their dreams of special operations ended on a Carolina backroad. Yara intended to be standing. She intended to be shooting straight. And she intended to give Hendricks nothing but excellence to write on his clipboard. The recruiter had told her to try something easier. She was about to show him exactly how wrong he had been. The ruck march began at 0500, before the heat could build to its full cruelty. 41 candidates stood at the start line with 45 pounds strapped to their backs and 12 miles of Carolina sand waiting to break them. Yara had taped her feet the night before, a preventive measure she had learned from an old sergeant during her first deployment. Blisters were not injuries. They were failures of preparation. Hendricks stood at the front of the formation with a stopwatch in his hand. His voice carried without effort across the silent assembly. 3 hours, not a minute more. Anyone who falls out does not return. Anyone who quits does not return. Anyone who cannot shoot straight at the end does not return. Begin. The formation lurched forward into the pre-dawn darkness. Yara found her pace immediately, a steady rhythm that would carry her through the distance without burning reserves she would need for the shooting qualification. Around her, candidates settled into their own tempos. Some started too fast, their competitive instincts overriding tactical sense. They would pay for that later. The first mile passed without incident. The second brought the first casualty, a candidate from Oklahoma who had hidden a stress fracture for 3 days and could hide it no longer. He dropped to one knee on the roadside, his face twisted with pain and something worse. Shame. The medics collected him without ceremony. By mile 4, the formation had stretched into a long column of suffering. The fast starters were slowing now, their early aggression transformed into oxygen debt and cramping muscles. Yara maintained her position in the upper third, her stride unchanged, her breathing controlled. Hendricks appeared beside her at mile 6. He matched her pace effortlessly, his own ruck riding high on his shoulders as if it weighed nothing. "You're doing well," he said. For now. Yara did not respond. She knew what was coming. The problem is that doing well is not enough. Any athlete can perform when conditions are perfect. What I need to know is whether you can perform when everything is falling apart, when you have not slept in 3 days, when the person next to you is bleeding out, when a mission depends on you doing something your body is telling you it cannot do. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. I have watched soldiers bigger and stronger than you break on marches like this. Not because their bodies failed, because their minds negotiated a surrender their bodies were forced to accept. You think you're different. You think that little speech you gave your friend about pain being information makes you special. It is not. It makes you someone who has not yet discovered her limits. He pulled ahead without waiting for a response. Yara watched his back recede into the morning mist and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not doubt, recognition. He was trying to plant seeds that would bloom into failure at the worst possible moment. She had seen the technique before, used by coaches and drill sergeants, and anyone else who understood that warfare was mental before it was physical. She would not let those seeds take root. Mile 8 brought the hills. Short but steep, the kind that burned quadriceps and tested ankles. Birch was struggling now, her natural athleticism undermined by a body that had never learned to suffer efficiently. She was still moving, but her form was deteriorating, her stride becoming choppy and uncertain. Yara could have passed her, could have focused on her own performance and let Birch find her own way through the pain. That was what Hendricks would expect. That was what competition demanded. Instead, Yara fell back until she was running beside the taller woman. She said nothing, did not offer encouragement or advice, simply matched Birch's pace and held it, a silent presence that said you are not alone in this. Birch glanced at her with something like gratitude, then returned her focus to the road ahead. Her stride steadied. Not much, but enough. They crossed the finish line together at 2 hours and 47 minutes, ahead of 19 other candidates, ahead of Prescott, who had started too fast and paid the price in the final miles, ahead of expectations that had been set for them before they ever arrived. Hendricks marked their times on his clipboard. His expression revealed nothing. The stress shoot began 30 minutes later. Candidates were given water and a brief rest, just long enough for their heart rates to begin settling before they were driven up again. The range was set for qualification standards, targets at distances from 25 to 300 meters. Passing required hitting 80% of targets while maintaining proper form and safety protocols. Yara took her position on the firing line and waited for the command. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The ruck march had taken something from her, as it had taken something from everyone, but it had not taken the things that mattered. The targets began to appear. She engaged them with mechanical precision, each shot placed where she intended it to go. The rifle became an extension of her will, and her will did not waver. When the scoring was complete, Yara had hit 48 of 50 targets, 96%, the highest score of the day. Hendricks reviewed the results in front of the assembled candidates. He read the scores aloud, lowest to highest, letting each number hang in the air before moving to the next. When he reached Yara's score, he paused. 96%, he said. Impressive. He looked directly at her, on a controlled range with no one shooting back. We will see if you can repeat that performance when it matters. He turned away before she could respond. Not that she would have. Her shooting had spoken for itself. That night, Reeve found her cleaning her rifle in the weapons maintenance area. He sat down across from her and began working on his own weapon without preamble. That was something today, he said. The march, the shooting. You made it look easy. It was not easy, Yara replied. Nothing worth doing is easy. He nodded slowly. I spent 2 years trying to make special forces. Washed out on the last phase because my knee gave up before I did. Spent a long time thinking I would never get another shot at something like this. He paused, his hand still on his rifle. I did not think I would find myself respecting someone half my size more than guys I served with in Ranger Battalion. But here we are. Yara looked up from her work. Respect is earned in the arena, not in the barracks. Reeve almost smiled. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. They finished their maintenance in comfortable silence. Outside, the Carolina night pressed against the windows, thick with humidity and the promise of more suffering to come. 3 candidates had been eliminated on the march. 2 more had failed to shoot. 36 remained. And somewhere in the darkness, Hendricks was planning what came next. Day 5 began with land navigation. Individual effort this time. No teams to share the burden or the blame. Each candidate received a map, a compass, and coordinates for 6 checkpoints scattered across 12 square miles of Carolina wilderness. Find them all within 8 hours or face elimination. Yara studied her map in the gray light before dawn. The terrain was familiar now, the contour lines translating into ridges and draws she had already crossed during team exercises. But familiarity was not mastery, and the forest had a way of looking different when you were alone. Hendricks distributed the starting coordinates with deliberate randomness, ensuring no 2 candidates would follow the same route. When he reached Yara, he held her map a moment longer than necessary. I put your first checkpoint in the swamp, he said quietly. The deep part. Try not to drown. He moved on before she could respond. Yara folded her map and checked her compass bearing. The swamp was 3 kilometers east. She would be there before the sun finished rising. The first checkpoint took 2 hours to reach. Not because she was slow, but because Hendricks had not been exaggerating about the depth. The water reached her chest in places, and the mud beneath sucked at her boots with every step. She kept her map and compass held high, protected from the murky water that smelled of decay and hidden things. The checkpoint marker was exactly where it should be, nailed to a cypress tree rising from the swamp like a crooked finger. Yara punched her card and checked her next bearing. 5 more to go. By midday, she had found 4 checkpoints. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and swamp water, her skin already showing the red marks that would become insect bites by evening. But she was ahead of schedule, and that margin might matter before the day was done. The 5th checkpoint brought her to a ridge overlooking a clearing. Below, she could see another candidate moving through the trees. Prescott. He was off course, his bearing carrying him away from where his checkpoint should be. She could see the error in his movement, the slight drift that would compound with every step until he was hopelessly lost. She could have let him go, could have watched his failure from the ridge and felt nothing but satisfaction at karma finding its target. He had made his contempt for her clear from the first day. He had questioned her presence, doubted her capability, made comments designed to undermine her confidence. Instead, Yara cupped her hands and called down to him. Prescott, you're drifting south. Check your bearing. He looked up, his face a mask of confusion and wounded pride. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, this small woman who had consistently outperformed him, offering help he had never asked for and did not want. Then he checked his compass, adjusted his course, moved on without a word of thanks. Yara did not need his gratitude. She needed him to succeed. The program would not be judged by those who failed, but by those who made it through. Every candidate who proved capable made the case for the next one, even the ones who did not deserve her help. She found her final checkpoint at hour 6 and returned to the assembly point with time to spare. Reed was already there, sitting on a fallen log with his boots off and his feet propped on his pack. He raised an eyebrow as she approached. "Swamp route," he asked. "The deep part," Yara confirmed. "Hendricks really does not like you." She sat down beside him and began checking her own feet for damage. "He does not have to like me. He has to pass me." The candidates filtered in over the next 2 hours. Some triumphant, some broken, some simply empty. Birch arrived at hour 7, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her card fully punched. Prescott came in 20 minutes later, his expression unreadable. 3 candidates did not return in time. They would be gone by morning. That evening, Yara found a quiet corner of the barracks and allowed herself a moment of stillness. The constant motion of the course left little room for reflection, but she had learned to steal these moments when she could. Her body ached in ways that would have seemed unbearable a week ago. Now, the pain was simply background noise, a frequency she had learned to tune out. Her father had called this the long game. He had played it himself, immigrating from Nigeria with nothing but an engineering degree and a belief that excellence would eventually be recognized. It had taken him 15 years to reach a position that matched his capabilities. 15 years of being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. The only limits that matter, he had told her once, are the ones you accept. She had not accepted any limits yet. She did not intend to start now. A shadow fell across her bunk. Captain Diane Fawcett stood in the aisle, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp. She was the course commander, a woman who had navigated the maze of military politics to reach a position where she could open doors for others. "Mind if I sit?" Fawcett asked. Yara gestured to the empty space beside her. The captain settled onto the mattress with the ease of someone who had spent years sitting on worse. "I reviewed the day's results," Fawcett said. "You finished 4th overall, highest among the female candidates by a significant margin." Yara waited. There was always more. Master Sergeant Hendricks submitted a note with his evaluation. "He believes you are being carried by natural ability rather than developed skill. He thinks you will fold when the pressure exceeds your talent." "And what do you think?" Yara asked. Fawcett was quiet for a moment. "I think talent is what gets you to the starting line. Everything after that is character." She stood and straightened her uniform. "I also think Hendricks has been wrong before. He just does not like admitting it." She walked away without waiting for a response. Yara watched her go, then lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove what she already knew about herself, new chances for Hendricks to learn what he refused to see. Outside, the night sounds of Fort Bragg continued their endless rhythm. Helicopters in the distance. Cadence calls from units still training in the darkness. The heartbeat of a military that was slowly, reluctantly, making room for soldiers like her. 33 candidates remained. The halfway point was approaching. Yara closed her eyes and let her body begin its repairs. She would need every ounce of strength for what was coming. Hendricks had promised to break something inside her. She intended to show him there was nothing left to break. The bell rang at 0317. Not a wake-up call, a surrender. Yara opened her eyes to see Birch standing at the front of the barracks, her hand still on the brass bell that every candidate dreaded. The bell meant voluntary withdrawal. The bell meant the end of everything. Birch's face was wet with tears she was not bothering to hide. Her right ankle was wrapped in a compression bandage that had not been there the night before. She had been hiding the injury for days, pushing through pain that had finally become impossible to ignore. "I am sorry," Birch said to no one in particular. "I wanted this so much." No one responded. There was nothing to say. The bell had spoken, and its verdict was final. Yara watched as Birch collected her gear and walked toward the door. Their eyes met for just a moment. Birch tried to smile, but could not quite manage it. Then she was gone, swallowed by the Carolina darkness, her dreams of special operations ending not with a dramatic failure, but with the quiet admission that her body had limits her will could not overcome. The barracks fell silent again, but sleep did not return. Not for Yara, not for any of them. At morning formation, Hendricks addressed the remaining 32 candidates with his usual economy of words. He did not mention Birch by name. He did not need to. Some of you are injured, he said. Some of you are hiding it. That is your choice. But understand this. The enemy will not care about your injuries. The mission will not pause for your recovery. If you cannot perform at full capacity when it matters, you are a liability. And liabilities get people killed. His eyes swept the formation and stopped on Yara. Today we begin combat medical training. You will learn to keep soldiers alive when everything is trying to kill them. Some of you will discover you do not have the stomach for blood. Better to learn that here than in a village in Afghanistan with a teammate bleeding out at your feet. The training was brutal in a different way than the physical evolutions. Simulated casualties with makeup so realistic that the mind forgot it was fake. Arterial bleeding that sprayed hot and red across hands trying to apply tourniquets. Screaming that sounded too genuine to be acting. The chaos of a mass casualty event compressed into a training lane designed to overwhelm every sense. Yara worked through each scenario with methodical calm. Her hands did not shake when she packed wounds with gauze. Her voice did not waver when she called out triage categories. The instructors threw complications at her, simulated enemies, equipment failures, patients who fought against treatment, and she adapted to each one without losing focus. Hendricks observed from the edge of the training area. When Yara completed her final scenario, he approached with his clipboard held like a shield. Calm is easy when the blood is fake, he said. When it is real, when it is someone you know, when you can smell what the inside of a human being smells like, that is when we find out who you really are. Yara met his gaze. I have smelled it before. He paused, something flickering behind his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or the first crack in his certainty. Before he could respond, a runner appeared with a message. Yara was wanted at the admin building. Personal matter. She found a letter waiting for her, hand-addressed in her mother's careful script. The paper smelled faintly of the perfume her mother had worn for as long as Yara could remember. She opened it in the privacy of a supply closet, away from eyes that might see whatever her face revealed. My dearest Yara, the letter began. Your father and I pray for you every morning and every night. We know you're doing something difficult. We know you are doing something important. We also know that you have been doing difficult and important things since you were a little girl who refused to believe she could not keep up with her brother. Yara felt something loosen in her chest, something she had been holding tight without realizing it. The letter continued. I remember the day you came home from that recruiting office. You were so angry. That man told you to try something easier, and I watched your jaw set in that way it does when you have made a decision nothing can change. Your father laughed when you told us, not because it was funny, but because he recognized himself in you. The stubbornness, the refusal to accept limits others try to impose. There was more. Stories from home, updates on relatives, the small details of a life continuing while she was away. But it was the closing lines that Yara read 3 times before folding the letter and pressing it against her heart. You have never failed at anything you truly committed to. Not because you are incapable of failure, but because you do not commit to things you cannot achieve. You know yourself. You always have. Trust that knowledge. Trust the girl who looked at that recruiter and decided to prove him wrong. She has never let you down. Yara returned to training with the letter tucked inside her uniform, close to her skin. The afternoon brought more scenarios, more simulated blood, more opportunities for Hendricks to find the weakness he was certain existed. He did not find it. That evening, as the sun painted the Carolina sky in shades of orange and red, Hendricks called Yara's name as the other candidates headed for chow. She stopped, turned, waited. He walked toward her with his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable in the fading light. I knew a soldier once, he said. She was not supposed to be where she was. Nobody wanted her there. But she was stubborn, like you. Thought she could prove everyone wrong through sheer force of will. What happened to her? Yara asked. She got people killed. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. She could not keep up when it mattered. The team had to slow down for her, and in the time it took to wait for her, the enemy moved into position. 2 of my friends died because someone wanted to prove a point. Yara absorbed this. She understood now. His opposition was not abstract prejudice. It was grief transformed into conviction. I'm not her, Yara said quietly. Hendricks studied her for a long moment. No, you are not, but you have not proven you are anything else yet. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the sunset and the weight of what she now understood. Tomorrow would bring the field training exercise. 3 days in the wilderness with Hendricks as the primary evaluator. 3 days to prove that his tragedy did not have to be her destiny. She touched the letter against her chest and felt her mother's faith like armor. The recruiter had been wrong. The soldier Hendricks remembered was not her story. It was time to write her own. The trucks dropped them in the wilderness at midnight. No briefing, no preparation time. Just 32 candidates standing in a clearing with their rucks and their weapons and the stars wheeling overhead. Hendricks emerged from the darkness like something born from it. His voice carried across the clearing without effort. Welcome to the field training exercise. For the next 72 hours, you will operate as a team in a simulated combat environment. You will conduct patrols. You will execute raids. You will be hunted by an opposing force that knows this terrain better than you do. Sleep will be a luxury you cannot afford. Mistakes will have consequences. He began dividing candidates into teams. Yara found herself assigned with Reeve and Prescott, along with a quiet specialist named Thorne who had barely spoken 10 words since the course began. An interesting combination. The skeptic who had become an ally. The hostile presence who owed her a debt he refused to acknowledge. And an unknown factor who might prove valuable or worthless when pressure came. Their first objective was a reconnaissance patrol to a suspected enemy position 3 kilometers north. Yara studied the map by Redland's flashlight, memorizing terrain features and potential ambush sites. Reeve checked weapons and equipment. Prescott stood apart, his jaw tight, with something that might have been anger or fear. Thorne surprised them all. She had spent 6 years in military intelligence before volunteering for the CST program. Her knowledge of patrol tactics was encyclopedic, delivered in a whisper so soft it barely disturbed the night air. They moved out in a staggered column with Yara on point. The forest swallowed them whole, darkness pressing close on every side. Every sound became a potential threat. Every shadow held the possibility of ambush. 3 hours later, they reached the objective without contact. The suspected enemy position was empty, but signs of recent activity marked the ground. Bullet prints, disturbed vegetation, a cold fire pit that had burned within the last day. Yara reported the findings via radio and received new orders. Establish an observation post. Monitor for enemy movement. Maintain position until relieved. They settled into the long wait that defined so much of military operations. Minutes stretched into hours. The forest sounds became familiar, then invisible, the mind filtering them in a background noise while remaining alert for anything that did not belong. Prescott broke the silence at hour 2. His voice was barely audible, meant only for Yara's ears. Why did you help me? During land navigation, I was lost, and you could have let me fail. Yara considered her answer. The darkness made honesty easier, because your failure would not have been my victory. Every candidate who makes it through this program proves that the next one can too. Your success helps everyone who comes after. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said something that sounded like thanks. Dawn brought relief and new orders. A squad-level raid on an enemy camp, time-sensitive, no room for error. The candidates gathered at the assembly point where another instructor waited with intelligence briefings and aerial photographs. But it was the conversation Yara overheard that stopped her cold. 2 instructors stood at the edge of the clearing, speaking in low tones they thought were private. One of them was talking about Hendricks. He has been different since Hellmand, the first instructor said. That operation broke something in him. The woman was not even supposed to be there, the second replied. Some cultural advisor they attached at the last minute. No combat training. No physical preparation. When they hit the compound, she could not keep pace. The team had to slow down to keep her in sight, and the enemy used that gap. 2 dead, Henderson and Kowalski. Hendricks watched them both go down. The woman survived. He never forgave her for that. Yara stepped away before they noticed her listening. The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. Hendricks was not fighting her. He was fighting a ghost. Every female candidate who walked through his course became the woman who had gotten his friends killed. Every success they achieved was a threat to the narrative he had built to survive his grief. Understanding did not make it easier, but it changed the nature of the battle. The raid commenced at noon. Yara's team was assigned the eastern approach, tasked with breaching a secondary entrance while the main element hit the front. The objective was to capture a role player simulating a high-value target without alerting guards who would execute him if given warning. They moved through the forest like shadows. Communication reduced to hand signals and the silent language of soldiers who had learned to read each other's movements. Prescott took point this time. His earlier hostility transformed into something that resembled respect. Thorne provided overwatch with a precision that suggested hidden depths. Reeve anchored the rear, his experience filling gaps the others did not know existed. Yara made the call at the breach point. A 3 count with hand signals, then controlled violence through the doorway. The role players inside reacted with scripted resistance, but the team flowed around obstacles like water, finding its path. The high-value target was secured in under 90 seconds. Hendricks was waiting outside when they emerged. His face revealed nothing as he marked his clipboard, but his eyes lingered on Yara longer than necessary. That night, around a small fire permitted for the exercise's midpoint rest, Reeve asked the question that had been building for days. What made you choose this? You could have done anything. Why special operations? Yara stared into the flames and found herself telling the truth. Because someone told me I could not. A recruiter in Houston 8 years ago. He looked at me and saw everything I was not. Small, female, Nigerian parents. He suggested administrative work, something more suitable for someone like me. She paused, letting the memory breathe. I walked out of that office knowing exactly what I was going to do with my life. Not to prove him wrong. That came later, but because he showed me who I refused to become. Someone who accepts limits other people set. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called its hunting cry. Reeve nodded slowly. The best soldiers I know are the ones who had something to prove. Not to others. To themselves. Yara looked at him across the flames. What are you proving? That the injury does not define me. That one failure does not have to be the end of the story. They sat together in comfortable silence until the order came to move out. Phase 2 of the exercise was beginning, and somewhere in the darkness, Hendricks was watching. Phase 2 dropped them into chaos. The opposing force hit their patrol base at 0200, simulated mortar fire and blank rounds shattering the fragile rest they had managed to steal. Candidates scattered into the darkness, training taking over where conscious thought failed. Yara found cover behind a fallen oak and began counting heads, tried to establish who was where in the confusion. Reeve materialized beside her, his breathing controlled despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Prescott and Thorne were 20 meters east, pinned by a machine gun position that was chewing through the tree line with disciplined bursts. We need to flank, Yara said. That gun is the key. Reeve nodded. I will take Prescott left. You and Thor go right. Whoever gets position first takes the shot. They split without further discussion, trust replacing the need for words. Yara moved through the undergrowth with Thorne close behind, their passage silent despite the chaos erupting around them. The machine gun continued its rhythm, predictable now that she had listened long enough to learn its pattern. The gunner never saw them coming. Thorne took him with a simulated kill shot from 15 meters while Yara covered the approach. The weapon fell silent, and the tide of the engagement shifted. By dawn, the opposing force had been pushed back and the patrol base secured. 3 candidates had been marked as casualties. Their participation in the exercise ended by evaluator judgment. 29 remained. Hendricks gathered them as the sun broke through the tree canopy, his face showing the first signs of fatigue Yara had seen since the course began. Even instructors had limits. Phase 3 begins in 6 hours, he announced. Individual evaluation. Each of you will be tested alone. Your teammates cannot help you. Your training cannot save you. Only you can determine whether you belong here. He dismissed them to rest, but Yara found sleep impossible. Her mind kept returning to the overheard conversation, the story of Hellmand, the weight of grief that Hendricks carried like a rucksack he could never put down. She understood him now in a way that felt almost unfair. He was not her enemy. He was a wounded soldier still fighting a battle that had ended years ago. Thorne sat down beside her without invitation. The quiet specialist had proven herself during the night's chaos, her calm competence revealing depths that her silence had hidden. You were thinking about him, Thorne said. Hendricks. Yara did not bother denying it. I learned something about his past. It explains things. Thorne nodded slowly. I knew one of them. Kowalski. We went through basic together. He was going to propose to his girlfriend when he got home from that deployment. She paused, her voice softening. He never got home. I am sorry, Yara said. Do not be. Be what he would have wanted. Someone who makes the mission succeed. Someone who brings everyone home. Thorne looked at her with eyes that held old pain and new purpose. Hendricks blames that woman because blaming himself would destroy him. But the truth is that missions fail for 1,000 reasons. She was just the reason he could see. The stars were fading now, dawn approaching with the promise of more trials. Yara felt the weight of the conversation settling into her bones, becoming part of her understanding. What made you volunteer for this? She asked. Because I was tired of being in the room where decisions were made instead of the ground where they mattered. Thorne almost smiled. Intelligence work is important. But I wanted to be the one kicking down doors, not the one telling others which doors to kick. They sat together as the light grew, two women who had chosen the harder path for reasons that made sense only to themselves. Around them, candidates stirred and stretched, preparing for whatever came next. 6 hours later, Phase 3 began. The individual evaluation was designed to break spirits. Each candidate faced a series of challenges calibrated to exploit their specific weaknesses. For some, it was physical. For others, psychological. For Yara, it was both. Hendricks administered her evaluation personally. The scenario was a hostage rescue with impossible constraints. Limited ammunition. Injured teammate who could not be left behind. Time pressure that allowed no room for hesitation. And an obstacle course between her and the objective that seemed designed by someone who had studied her personnel file and identified every physical limitation her small frame created. She ran the course 3 times before completing it. Each failure earned a notation on Hendricks' clipboard and a comment designed to plant doubt. Too slow. A real hostage would be dead by now. Your arms are too short for that wall. Maybe you should have tried something easier. The teammate you were carrying would have bled out a minute ago. How does that feel? Yara did not respond to any of it. She simply reset and ran again, her body screaming protest her mind refused to hear. On the 3rd attempt, she cleared the wall by finding a different route. She completed the course 2 seconds under the time limit. She neutralized the hostage-takers with shots that grouping in the center of each target. Hendricks marked his clipboard in silence. The rescue was successful, Yara said. Her voice was steady despite the fire burning in her muscles. The teammates survived. The hostages survived. The mission was accomplished. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, some internal battle she was not meant to see. The scenario was designed to be failed, he said finally. No one was supposed to complete it. Yara held his gaze. Then you designed it wrong. She turned and walked toward the extraction point, leaving him standing alone with his clipboard and his calculations and the slowly crumbling certainty that had defined his worldview for years. That night, the remaining candidates gathered at the final assembly point. Dirty, exhausted, pushed beyond limits they had not known they possessed, but still standing, still committed, still refusing to accept the easier path. 28 had made it through the field exercise. 4 more had been eliminated or withdrawn. The end was approaching now, visible on the horizon like a destination that had once seemed impossible. Reeve found Yara at the edge of the gathering, her eyes fixed on something in the middle distance. Hendricks talked to Captain Fawcett, he said quietly. I do not know what was said, but she was smiling when he walked away. Yara absorbed this without reaction. One battle at a time. The final phase of assessment was coming. Everything she had endured, everything she had proven, everything she had survived would come down to one last test. She intended to pass it. The recruiter's voice echoed in her memory, faint now, almost forgotten. Try something easier. She had tried something impossible instead. And impossible was starting to feel like just another word for what she had not accomplished yet. The final gate came without warning. Day 19 began like any other, with pre-dawn physical training and the familiar weight of exhaustion that had become their constant companion. But at 0800, instead of the scheduled tactical training, the candidates were loaded onto trucks and driven to an unfamiliar section of the base. The building that waited for them looked like an abandoned warehouse. Inside, it had been transformed into something else entirely. A maze of rooms and corridors, simulated village structures, shooting lanes with targets that appeared without pattern or predictability. Captain Fawcett addressed them from a raised platform, her voice carrying easily across the assembled candidates. This is your final assessment. Everything you have learned, everything you have endured, comes down to the next 12 hours. You will operate individually through a series of scenarios designed to test every skill required of a cultural support team member. Kumba, communication, medical, cultural engagement, stress inoculation. There are no second chances. There are no partial scores. You pass or you fail. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Some of you will not make it through today. That is not a prediction. It is a statistical certainty. The only question that matters is whether you will be among those who do. The candidates drew numbers for their order. Yara pulled 17. Midway through the pack. Enough time to prepare mentally, but not enough to let anticipation become anxiety. She watched as candidates entered the building one by one. Some emerged quickly, their faces blank with the particular emptiness of failure. Others took longer, reappearing with expressions that ranged from cautious hope to quiet confidence. There was no way to know what waited inside, no way to prepare for the specific challenges, only the certainty that everything depended on the next few hours. Reeve was number 12. He entered the building with his shoulders squared and his jaw set, the posture of a man who had already decided how this would end. When he emerged 90 minutes later, he caught Yara's eye and nodded once. The gesture said everything his words did not need to. Number 17 was called. Yara walked toward the entrance with her heart rate steady and her mind clear. The door closed behind her, sealing her in darkness that lasted exactly 3 seconds before lights blazed and chaos erupted. The first scenario was a village engagement. Role players in traditional Afghan dress, some friendly, some hostile, with no clear indicators of which was which. Yara moved through the environment, gathering intelligence through conversation, reading body language, identifying the hidden threat before it could materialize. When a hostile actor drew a concealed weapon, her response was instantaneous. 2-shot center mass. Threat eliminated. Civilians protected. The second scenario was medical. A simulated casualty with arterial bleeding, compromised airway, and penetrating chest trauma. Multiple injuries requiring triage decisions that would determine survival. Yara worked through each problem with methodical precision, her hands remembering training while her mind stayed 3 steps ahead. The third scenario was psychological, an interrogation resistance exercise that pushed every mental boundary she possessed. Questions designed to disorient. Techniques designed to break. Hours of pressure applied with clinical efficiency by instructors who had studied the art of breaking human beings. She gave him nothing. The fourth scenario was physical, an obstacle course that made the field exercise look gentle. Walls, ropes, water, confined spaces that triggered primal fear. And, at the end, a shooting qualification that required perfect accuracy from hands that should have been shaking too hard to hold a weapon steady. Her hands did not shake. The fifth and final scenario waited at the end of a long corridor. The door was unmarked. No indication of what lay beyond. Yara pushed it open and found Hendricks waiting alone in an empty room. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable in the harsh fluorescent light. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "This is not a test," he said finally. "This is a choice." Yara waited. "You have passed every evaluation. Your scores are among the highest in the course's history. By every objective measure, you have earned your place in this program." He paused, something shifting behind his eyes. "But I am offering you an alternative." She felt the trap before he spoke it. "Medical withdrawal," he continued. "Honorable. No stigma. You return to your previous unit with a commendation for attempting a program that defeats most candidates. No one will ever know you had the option to continue. No one will question your courage or your commitment." "Why?" Yara asked. "Because what comes next is not training. It is war. Real operations. Real enemies. Real consequences." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I have watched soldiers die because someone wanted to prove a point. I have carried that weight for years. I am offering you the chance to walk away before you become another weight someone else has to carry." The room fell silent. Yara could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong, the rhythm of someone who had already made her decision long ago. "You are not offering me a choice," she said. "You are offering yourself absolution. If I walk away, you get to believe you were right. That women do not belong here. That the soldier in Helmand was proof of something universal instead of evidence of one person's limitations." Hendricks' expression flickered. The first crack she had ever seen in his armor. "I'm not her," Yara continued. "I was never her. And the only way you will ever know that is if you let me prove it where it matters. Not here, not in training, in the field, on operations, with lives depending on my performance." She stepped past him toward the door on the far side of the room. The exit, the end of assessment, the beginning of everything she had worked toward. "I am not walking away," she said without turning back. "I never learned how." She pushed through the door and emerged into sunlight, so bright it momentarily blinded her. When her vision cleared, she saw Fawcett waiting with a clipboard and something that looked almost like pride. "Candidate Okonkwo," Fawcett said. "Welcome to the cultural support team." Behind her, still inside the building, Hendricks stood alone in the empty room. His offer had been rejected. His certainty had been challenged. And somewhere deep in the architecture of his grief, something was beginning to shift. The final count was 23. 23 candidates who had survived everything the course could throw at them. Yara was one of them. But the real test was still coming. Afghanistan waited on the horizon, and with it, the chance to prove that her words were more than words. The recruiter had told her to try something easier. She had tried something impossible instead, and impossible had just become reality. The graduation ceremony was brief. Military efficiency applied to celebration, stripping it down to its essential elements. 23 candidates stood in formation as Captain Fawcett pinned the Cultural Support Team qualification badge to each uniform. When she reached Yara, she paused just long enough for their eyes to meet. "You earned this," Fawcett said quietly. "Remember that when it gets hard." Yara nodded once. The weight of the badge was negligible. The weight of what it represented was something else entirely. Reeve found her after the ceremony, his own badge catching the Carolina sunlight. His face held an expression she had not seen before. Peace, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "We did it," he said. "We survived selection," Yara replied. "We have not done anything yet." He laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him as much as her. "You really do not know how to celebrate, do you? I will celebrate when there is something to celebrate. Passing a course is not an accomplishment. It is permission to attempt the accomplishment." Reeve shook his head, still smiling. "You are exhausting. You know that, right?" "I have been told." The next 2 weeks brought advanced training. Integration exercises with the Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha teams they would be supporting. Language refreshers and cultural briefings specific to their deployment region. Weapons qualifications on systems they had not touched during selection. The pace was relentless, but it felt different now. Less like punishment and more like preparation. Prescott approached her on the third day. His hostility had faded during the field exercise, replaced by something more complicated. He stood at parade rest, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past her shoulder. "I never thank you," he said, "for the land navigation and other things." Yara waited. "I was wrong about you, about what you could do, about what you belonged." He finally met her gaze. "I'm not saying I was wrong about everything, but I was wrong about you specifically." It was not an apology. It was not quite respect, but it was acknowledgement, and from Prescott, that was more than she had expected. "Fair enough," she said. He nodded and walked away. Some bridges took time to build. The first stone had been laid. The deployment orders arrived on a Tuesday. Connaught Province, Afghanistan. Attached to ODA 7215, a 12-man team with a reputation for operating in the most dangerous terrain the country offered. Their area of operations included villages that had not seen coalition forces in months, communities where the women held information that could save lives or cost them. Yara studied the briefing materials with the focus of someone who understood that details mattered. The tribal dynamics, the key leaders, the cultural protocols that would determine whether she was welcomed or rejected. Every piece of information was a tool she might need when words became her primary weapon. The night before departure, she called home. Her father answered on the second ring. His voice carried the careful steadiness of someone who had practiced hiding worry. "Yara, we have been thinking of you. I know, Baba. I'm calling to tell you that I made it. I passed selection. I'm officially qualified." The pause that followed held years of unspoken fear and fiercer pride. "Your mother will want to speak with you," he said finally. "But first, I want to say something. When you were a little girl, you used to follow your brother everywhere. He would run, and you would run. He would climb, and you would climb. One day he told you that you were too small to keep up with him. Do you remember what you did?" "I outran him," Yara said. The memory was warm despite its age. "You outran him, and when he complained that you must have cheated, you offered to race him again. You were 8 years old, and you already understood that the only response to doubt is proof." He cleared his throat. "I am proud of you, Yara. Not because you passed their test, because you never stopped being that little girl who refused to be left behind." Her mother came on the line then, her voice thick with emotions she was trying to contain. The conversation was shorter than Yara wanted and longer than military schedules allowed. By the end, promises had been made and prayers had been offered, the rituals of families sending their children into harm's way. The C-17 lifted off from Bragg the following morning. Yara sat in the web seating with her gear stacked around her, watching America fall away through the small window. Beside her, Reeve dozed with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to sleep whenever opportunity allowed. Across the cargo bay, Thorne reviewed intelligence reports with the same intensity she brought to everything. And in the forward section, visible through the gap between equipment pallets, Hendricks sat alone. He had requested assignment as an observer for CST operations in theater. The official justification was quality assurance, ensuring that graduates performed to standard in combat conditions. But Yara knew the real reason. He needed to see for himself, needed to witness whether his fears were justified or whether everything he believed was built on a foundation of grief rather than truth. She did not resent his presence. If anything, she welcomed it. Let him watch. Let him observe every decision she made, every challenge she overcame, every life she helped save. Let him carry that evidence back to Fort Bragg and reconcile it with the ghost he had been fighting for years. The flight would take 18 hours. 18 hours to rest, to prepare, to steel herself for what waited on the other side of the world. Connaught Province. Mountains that touched the sky. Villages that had known war longer than she had been alive. And somewhere in those valleys, missions that would define whether the recruiter's dismissal had been wisdom or blindness. Yara closed her eyes and let the drone of the engines carry her towards sleep. The real test was coming. She intended to pass it the same way she had passed every test before, by refusing to accept any outcome but success. Connaught Province announced itself through the window of the helicopter. Mountains that rose like broken teeth against an impossibly blue sky. valleys carved by rivers that have been flowing since before humans walked this land. And somewhere in those folds of earth, villages that held secrets worth dying for. Forward operating Base Blessing sat in the Pesh River Valley, a collection of hardened structures and blast walls that represented the outer edge of Coalition presence. ODA 7215 met them on the landing zone. 12 men with beards and weathered faces who looked at Yara with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Their team sergeant, a master sergeant named Caldwell, shook her hand with a grip that tested without crushing. "Heard good things about you from selection," he said, "but selection is not here. Here is where we find out what you are actually made of." "I understand," Yara replied. "Good. We have an operation in 48 hours. Village in the Karangal. Women there might know where a weapons cache is hidden. Local males will not talk to us, but they cannot stop their women from talking to you." He paused, his eyes measuring her. "Think you can handle that? That is why I am here." Caldwell nodded once and turned to brief the rest of the team. Yara felt Hendricks' gaze on her back, but did not acknowledge it. He was here to observe. Let him observe. The first operation went smoothly. A daylight patrol into a village that had been cleared multiple times but never truly won. Yara accompanied the team through the narrow streets, her weapon ready, but her eyes focused on the women who watched from doorways and windows. She found her opportunity in a compound near the village center. An elderly woman with hands stained by decades of work and eyes that held intelligence sharper than her weathered face suggested. Yara approached with the cultural protocol she had studied, the greetings and gestures that signaled respect rather than intrusion. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, Yara had the location of a meeting site where Taliban commanders gathered to plan attacks on coalition patrols. Information that could save lives. Information that the male operators could never have obtained. Caldwell received her report with raised eyebrows. "We have been working this village for 6 months. You got more in 20 minutes than we got in half a year." "The women see things," Yara said. "They hear things. They remember things. They just needed someone they could tell." The intelligence led to a successful ambush 3 days later. For enemy fighters killed, documents captured, a network disrupted. Yara was not part of the assault element, but she had made it possible. Her contribution was invisible to anyone who did not understand how the pieces fit together. Hendricks understood. She could see it in the way he watched her during the after-action review. His expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. The second operation was different. Night raid. High-value target. A compound in a village that had been hostile to coalition forces since the beginning of the war. The target was a Taliban commander responsible for IED attacks that had killed 17 Americans in the past year. Intelligence suggested he would be present for one night, only before disappearing back into Pakistan. Yara's role was supposed to be simple. Accompany the assault element to search female occupants and gather any additional intelligence from women in the compound. Stay behind the operators. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. The plan fell apart 30 seconds after the breach. The first IED detonated as the lead element entered the courtyard. The blast threw operators in every direction, filling the air with dust and debris and the screams of wounded men. The second IED was on a timer, placed to catch responders rushing to help the initial casualties. Yara saw it before anyone else. The slight disturbance in the ground. The wire trailing toward the compound wall. The pattern that her training had taught her to recognize. Prescott was directly in its path. She did not think, did not calculate, did not hesitate. Her body was moving before her mind could form objections, crossing the distance in a dead sprint that ended with her shoulder driving into Prescott's chest. They hit the ground together as the second blast tore the air where he had been standing. The world became noise and pressure and the copper taste of blood in her mouth. But she was moving again before the dust settled, dragging Prescott toward cover as rounds began cracking overhead from a previously unseen fighting position. Her medical training took over. Prescott was conscious but disoriented, blood flowing from shrapnel wounds in his arm and shoulder. She applied a tourniquet with hands that did not shake, packed the wounds with gauze, kept him talking while the firefight raged around them. The enemy position was suppressing the team's movement. Pinned behind inadequate cover, the operators could not advance to complete the mission or maneuver to evacuate casualties. Someone needed to eliminate that threat. Yara did not ask permission. She identified the position through the muzzle flashes, calculated the distance, steadied her breathing despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Then she rose from cover just long enough to place 3 rounds exactly where they needed to go. The enemy gun fell silent. The team exploited the opening, flowing forward with the violence of action that defines special operations. The compound was cleared. The high-value target was captured. The mission was accomplished. But Yara did not see any of that. She was still with Prescott, keeping pressure on his wounds, keeping him conscious, keeping him alive until the medevac bird touched down in a storm of rotor wash and dust. The medics took over. Prescott grabbed her arm as they loaded him onto the stretcher, his grip weak but insistent. "You saved my life," he said. The words cost him visible effort. Yara held his gaze. "Now we are even." He almost smiled. Then a morphine took him and his eyes drifted closed. The helicopter lifted off, carrying him toward the surgical team at Bagram. Yara watched it disappear over the mountains, her hands still red with his blood. When she turned around, Hendricks was standing 10 meters away. His face held an expression she had never seen before. Something that might have been recognition. Something that might have been the first fracture in a wall he had built to protect himself from grief. He said nothing. Neither did she. Some truths did not require words. The after-action review took place in a plywood building that smelled of dust and diesel. Maps covered the walls, marked with symbols that told stories of operations past and planned. Yara sat with the ODA team, her uniform still carrying traces of Prescott's blood that she had not had time to wash away. Caldwell ran through the timeline with clinical precision. The breach, the first IED, the second IED, the enemy fighting position, the successful capture of the high-value target despite catastrophic compromise of the initial plan. When he reached Yara's actions, he paused. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo identified the second IED before detonation and moved Sergeant Prescott out of the blast radius, he said. She then provided tactical combat casualty care under fire, while simultaneously engaging and neutralizing an enemy position that had the team pinned. His eyes found hers across the room. That is the kind of performance that earns medals. More importantly, it is the kind of performance that brings people home. The team sergeant from ODA 7215 spoke next. "We have been running operations in this valley for 8 months. Last night was one of the worst compromises we have faced. It should have been a disaster." He nodded toward Yara. It was not a disaster because of her. The review continued, but the message had been delivered. Yara had proven herself in the only arena that mattered. Not the training course. Not the evaluation scenarios. The battlefield, where theory became reality and credentials meant nothing compared to actions. Hendricks remained silent throughout the briefing. When it concluded and the team dispersed, he approached Yara with the deliberate pace of a man who had spent days deciding what to say. "Walk with me," he said. They moved through the FOB in silence, past the motor pool and the communication center and the memorial wall, where photographs of the fallen watched over the living. Hendricks stopped at a bench overlooking the valley, the mountains turning gold in the fading light. He sat. After a moment, Yara sat beside him. "Her name was Catherine Marsh," he said, "the woman in Helmand. She was a cultural advisor, not military. State Department. They attached her to our team because someone in Washington decided we needed better engagement with local women." Yara listened without interrupting. She was not a bad person. She believed in what she was doing. But she had no business being on that operation. No combat training. No physical preparation. When we hit the compound and things went wrong, she froze. The team had to slow down to keep her in sight, to keep her alive. He paused, his jaw tightening. Henderson and Kowalski died because of those seconds, because we were moving at her pace instead of ours. The silence stretched between them, heavy with old grief. I blamed her, Hendricks continued. For years, I blamed her. Every female candidate who walked into my course became her. Every one of them was going to get soldiers killed the way she got my friends killed. I made it my mission to break them before they could break someone else. He turned to look at Yara directly. You are not her, he said. I knew it during selection. I knew it when you completed the scenario I designed to be impossible. I knew it every time you refused to give me the failure I was looking for. But knowing something and accepting it are different things. Yara held his gaze. What changed? Last night changed. Watching you save Prescott. Watching you engage that position while rounds were cracking past your head. Watching you do everything I spent years believing you could not do. He shook his head slowly. I have been fighting a ghost, and the ghost was never you. It was my own guilt wearing a different face. She considered her response carefully. The moment felt fragile, like something that could shatter with the wrong words. The woman in Helmand made mistakes, Yara said finally. But you did not fail Henderson and Kowalski because of her. You failed them because war is chaos and chaos does not care about our plans. Blaming her let you avoid blaming the universe for being random and cruel. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher than before. You sound like someone who has thought about this. I have spent my whole life being blamed for things I could not control. My size, my gender, where my parents came from. At some point you learn that other people's blame tells you more about them than it does about you. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen anything close to warmth on his face. I'm not going to apologize, he said. What I put you through in selection made you better. It prepared you for what happened last night. If I'd gone easy on you, you might not have been ready. Yara nodded. I know, but I will say this. He stood, his silhouette dark against the sunset. You proved me wrong. Not about women in combat. I'm still not sure about that. But about you specifically. You belong here. You earned it. And I will make sure everyone who matters knows it. He extended his hand. Yara stood and took it. His grip was firm, but no longer testing. Just a soldier acknowledging another soldier. I am recommending you for the Bronze Star, he said, with valor device. What you did last night was not just competent. It was heroic. Yara released his hand. I did not do it for medals. I know. That is why you deserve one. He walked away, leaving her alone with the mountains and the sunset and the feeling of something completed. Not forgiveness, exactly. Hendricks was not a man who asked for forgiveness or granted it easily. But acknowledgement, recognition, the end of a war that had begun in a Houston recruiting station 8 years ago. She pulled out her phone and dialed home. Her mother answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone since Yara left. Mama, Yara said, I am okay. Everything is okay. The tears on the other end of the line said more than words could. Yara let her mother cry. Let her father's steady voice join the call. Let their love carry across oceans and time zones to reach her in this dusty corner of a foreign land. When the call ended, she sat for a while longer, watching the stars emerge over the Hindu Kush. The recruiter had told her to try something easier. She had tried something impossible instead. And impossible had just become her story. The ceremony took place at Fort Bragg on a Tuesday morning in October. The sky was Carolina blue, the air crisp with the first hints of autumn. 200 soldiers stood in formation on the parade field, their uniforms sharp and their posture perfect. Yara stood at the front, her dress uniform bearing the new badge she had earned in blood and sweat and refusal to quit. Beside her, Reeve wore his own Bronze Star, awarded for actions during a separate operation that had tested everything selection had taught him. They did not speak, but their silence held the understanding of soldiers who had walked through fire together. The reviewing officer was a brigadier general with combat patches from 3 different wars. He read the citation with the measured cadence of someone who understood that words on paper could never capture what they described. Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo distinguished herself by exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of hostile enemy action in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. When improvised explosive devices compromised her team's assault on a high-value target compound, Staff Sergeant Okonkwo demonstrated extraordinary courage by physically shielding a fellow soldier from secondary blast, providing life-saving medical care under direct enemy fire, and single-handedly neutralizing an enemy fighting position that had pinned down friendly forces. Her actions directly contributed to the successful capture of a Taliban commander responsible for numerous attacks on coalition personnel. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo's heroism reflects great credit upon herself, the cultural support team, and the United States Army. The general pinned the Bronze Star with its V device to her chest. The medal was small, barely noticeable against the dark green of her uniform, but its weight was something only she could feel. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant," the general said. "You have earned this." "Thank you, sir." He moved on to the next recipient. The ceremony continued with military precision, each award presented with the same formal gravity. But Yara's mind had already traveled somewhere else. 8 years back, a strip mall recruiting station in Houston. A man in uniform who had looked at her and seen everything she was not. She wondered if he ever thought about her. If he remembered the small young woman with a Nigerian name who had listened to his suggestion that she try something easier and walked out without a word. Probably not. She had been one of thousands who passed through his office, a face in a parade of faces, forgettable in every way that mattered to him. But she remembered him. She would always remember him. Not with anger anymore. Not even with the desire to prove him wrong. Just with the quiet recognition that his doubt had been the first stone in a path that led here. To this parade field. To this medal. To this moment. The ceremony concluded with the traditional pass in review. Yara marched with her unit, her steps precise, her eyes forward. In the crowd of spectators, she caught a glimpse of her parents. Her mother was crying openly, her father standing rigid with a military bearing he had never served but somehow understood. They had flown from Houston for this, had insisted, despite the cost, despite the distance. Afterward, in the reception area, her mother held her so tightly that breathing became optional. "My baby," her mother kept saying. "My brave, stubborn baby." Her father waited his turn, then embraced her with the quiet strength that had anchored her entire childhood. "The little girl who outran her brother," he said softly. "Look at her now." Prescott found her an hour later. He was out of the hospital, his arms still in a sling, but his eyes clear and focused. He stood before her with none of the hostility that had marked their early encounters. "I told my wife about you," he said. "Told her everything. How I treated you at the start. How wrong I was. How you saved my life, anyway." Yara waited. "She wants to meet you. Want to thank you in person." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "I spent my whole career thinking I knew what soldiers looked like, what they sounded like, what they were capable of. You changed that. Not just for me. For everyone who was watching." She extended her hand. He took it without hesitation. "Stay alive, Prescott," she said. "That is all the thanks I need." He nodded once, then walked away to join his family. Hendricks was the last to approach. He wore his dress uniform with the same rigid precision he brought to everything, but something in his bearing had changed. The wall behind his eyes had cracked, letting something human show through. "I put in the paperwork," he said. "You are being requested by name for future operations. ODA 7215 wants you back. So do 3 other teams who heard what happened." Yara absorbed this. The highest compliment Special Operations could offer. Not medals or citations, but the desire of elite soldiers to have her beside them when lives were on the line. "Thank you," she said, "for pushing me, for not letting me settle for good enough." He almost smiled. "That was not generosity. That was me trying to break you." "I know. It worked anyway." This time he did smile, brief and surprising. "I suppose it did." He extended his hand one final time. She shook it, feeling the weight of everything that had passed between them. Then he was gone, and she was alone with the autumn breeze and the fading echoes of the ceremony. A new cycle of CST candidates was arriving next week. 23 women who would face everything she had faced, who would be tested and broken and rebuilt into something stronger. Some of them would make it. Most would not. That was the nature of selection. But one of them might be like her. Small, underestimated, told by someone in authority that she should try something easier. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know what part resonated with you most. Maybe you have your own story of proving doubters wrong. Maybe someone told you that you could not do something and you did it anyway. We would love to hear about it. Yara walked toward the training area where the new candidates would soon arrive. She had no official role in their selection, but she could be present, could let them see what was possible, could be the proof that someone like them had walked this path and emerged on the other side. A young specialist approached her, nervousness radiating from every step. She was small, barely 5'3". Her uniform was new, her eyes wide with the uncertainty of someone standing at the beginning of something enormous. "Staff Sergeant," the specialist said. "I just wanted to say, I saw the ceremony. I heard what you did." She swallowed hard. "I am starting selection next week. Everyone keeps telling me I'm too small, that I should try something else." Yara looked at her, saw herself, 8 years younger, standing in a Houston recruiting station with doubt being offered like a gift she was supposed to accept. "What is your name?" Yara asked. "Specialist Rivera, Staff Sergeant." Yara placed a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me, Rivera. They will tell you that you cannot do this. They will show you every reason to quit. They will offer you easier paths with every step. But those paths lead away from who you are supposed to become." She squeezed once, then let go. "Stay on this one." Rivera nodded, something kindling behind her eyes. The same fire Yara had carried from that recruiting station to this parade field. The cycle was beginning again. Doubt offered. Doubt refused. Impossible attempted. And somewhere, a recruiter who had never learned her name had no idea that his dismissal had helped create exactly what he said could never exist. Yara smiled and walked toward the future. The story was not over. It was just beginning.